Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Friday. We are going to get right into it. Deanna, are you going to be advancing the slides? Does that work for you? Okay, let's get to the
Absolutely.
agenda then. All right, so thank you for joining us today to discuss best practices on representing children while in crisis. From the panels yesterday, we heard how the delay in adjudication of immigration relief is really affecting our clients in all sorts of ways, including their access to resources, their mental health, their stability, and it's continuing to leave our clients vulnerable to exploitation, harm, and sometimes resulting in crisis. So during our conversations today, we hope to provide you with the tools when these different critical issues arise during the course of your representation. So we have a great panel here for you today, including from the lens of social work, from the lens of clinician, from the attorney lens and the support staff lens. And we're excited to bring you this wonderful group of people to talk to you about how to support our clients in the toughest of times. In regards to some housekeeping, we do want to remind everyone that this is a recorded training, and it's later going to be posted and made available to the public. So for that reason, we won't be taking any questions about specific cases. We want to make sure and keep all of our clients' information as protected and confidential as possible. So here's our agenda. And we're going to start out by defining what a crisis is. So I'm going to turn it right over to the panel. Can you share how you would define a crisis and explain what your role would be in a crisis? Sarah, how do you feel about getting us started off? What is a crisis in your line of work?
So as a clinician and as a clinician that specializes in crisis and really big stuff, it's something that's life-threatening. And it's life-threatening to our client, to someone else in the client's family, or the potential to become life-threatening if we know the triggers, the domino effect that could happen based on our knowledge of our client. So anything that's really urgently threatening their life-sustaining well-being.
Deanna, from the point of view of an attorney, how do you see a crisis being defined?
Yeah, focusing on the legal case crisis, I think this can come into play when there's a situation that arises that affects the immediate eligibility of the immigration case, the immigration relief. It can be a situation in which the immigrant client's freedom of movement is restricted. If they're using drugs as a coping mechanism and they're arrested and then transferred to ICE custody, if they're a client that has a prior removal order and we're working on that relief and that motion to reopen and they end up in ICE custody and they're at imminent risk of removal to their home country. These are situations that have definitely come up for us, and you kind of have to get in full gear either to file a motion for stay, a motion to reopen, and it requires to take immediate legal action to prevent the loss of the immigration case.
Susie, as a paralegal, you're often the one who is first to speak to the clients that we have as they, are telling us about a crisis. How do you define a crisis in your work?
Absolutely. So I see a crisis as really any event that impacts a client's immediate life, safety, and overall well-being, while also taking in, considering like anything that could affect their immigration case. So as a paralegal, like my advocacy centers on the client and their case. So most of the times I do get the like frantic calls. And that is the point where I would have to assess if this is like an emergency, the way that Sarah says of like their life is in danger, or if it's like an emergency that could affect their immigration case, and being able to assess that when you do have that direct communication with clients is important. And you have to be able to like elevate this to the attorney and to the legal team.
Tatiana, I know we're speaking a lot and will be during our session about kids in the community, youth in the community. From your perspective at the Young Center, working primarily with kids in detention, how does a crisis look to a child or a youth who's in detention?
Yes, thank you, Lauren. So as you mentioned, here at the Young Center, we serve as child advocates for children while they're in the custody of ORR. And we do have some post-release involvement. So that is, I just want to give that brief background, since that will be the perspective that I'll be sharing with you all today. There are many situations in which children find themselves in crisis while they're detained, right? I think just the fact alone that they are detained can put them in crisis mode. But I just still want to provide a few examples. And this, a child can find themselves in a crisis when they're denied a phone call. Unfortunately, a phone call with a parent or a family member can be limited, right? If staff is not available to provide them with a phone call, a child might have to wait, and that can lead to a crisis for the child. Or another situation that we see often, especially as we're seeing children from Indigenous communities, or just in general, if their family doesn't have access to a phone, or might have digital literacy issues, right? They might have limits on how often they can connect with their family, and that also can create a crisis for the child because they're not connecting with their family as often as they would like. Another example is when a reunification or a sponsor might be denied. This creates a longer length of stay in custody, and this unfortunately really takes a toll on a child, because the longer they are there, the longer they're away from their family. And it's definitely not an easy transition to a long-term foster care program or another setting where they would have more freedom, assuming they started in a shelter. So that can definitely create a crisis from a child. Another situation is when a child does connect with their family and they find out that there is a crisis back home. Oftentimes, children learn of a family member passing away, and sadly, they have to grieve on their own. And that can be very difficult. Staff are supportive, but it definitely, is not the same. And I've worked with children that are, on video calls late at night because they're watching El Rosario, or they're watching whatever is going on from custody. And that's, as close as they can get to being with their family. Another crisis might be also if they are struggling with their mental health. Unfortunately, a lot of times we see children placed on medication and they really struggle with accepting getting on medication. And we, are often in a position when we advocate for perhaps different types of therapy to help the child feel better and alleviate that crisis before getting on medication. But we do see that, and also any other medical condition that might require them to undergo sometimes even surgery. We've had children have to undergo surgery while in custody and having to deal with that on their own.
Thank you, Tatiana. Hi, Yanira. Can you tell us from your perspective as a social worker how you identify when a client is in crisis?
Yes. So I actually do want to tag along to what Tatiana was saying. I used to work at a detention center before as a youth care worker and as a case manager. And those phone calls, even though it might sound so simple for us, on the other end, they're so crucial to them. I've seen it where they stop eating, where they're unable to sleep well or enjoy their activities. And so I can definitely see how that becomes a crisis, for example, to Tatiana. However, However, my focus is a little bit more of the case management services or social services that I will provide to victims of crime. So I used to work with primarily survivors of trafficking for the past 5 to 6 years, both adults and minors. And the main thing that I could see and identified as crisis as a social worker and the case management aspect was when anything would really interfere with their basic needs. And of course, I'm sure you all have heard it multiple times with these trainings or with these presentations, but housing is always such a huge issue. It's an issue for adults and it's an issue for minors, specifically for minors, right? And so that's something that I had to learn how to navigate the waters with. And so I had to start having or approaching it in a more holistic approach. And so a lot of the times, I'm sure you all might be aware of, right? But when a minor or a child is being sponsored, the person has to, or the sponsors have to go through the family reunification packet process. So even though it's a federal contract, that contract really is not enforced. It has not been enforced, at least on my end, with the clients that I've had in the past, right? And so, and even though there are sponsors, they're not legal guardians. And so that's something that I've had to learn throughout the process. So what's happened before when I've had clients who become homeless, either because they get kicked out or there are certain things that are happening at home they're not comfortable with, I try to find a loop around it. So the best way that I've been able to address this issue is by trying to get a hold of their sponsor / caregiver and just receiving that a general consent. And so I will be on the phone and be like, do you give me permission to remove the client or to remove the minor? And a lot of the times the sponsor will be like, yeah, my wife doesn't want him or her anymore. Yes, please take them away. I don't care where they go, right? So as a social worker, you always have to case note your stuff like that. Always protect yourself in that area. And that's how I would be able to address this issue. And to quickly summarize it, I would be able to place clients, of course, shelters are not available because they need guardian consent. And so, for example, through volunteers. So our agency at the past would have volunteers or maybe other clients who were looking for roommates. And so what I would do to address the issue too is assess their homes. I wouldn't just place them there, right? I would go make sure that home was safe enough for them. Even if they were just staying for 1 or 2 days, make sure no illicit activities was happening. So all of this is still addressing the crisis. And then secondly, the other process that I've seen when dealing with crisis as a social worker in the past with UCs or with clients is medical crisis. So I've had clients where they become a victim of a crime. And so sometimes that means that I'm with a hospital at Texas Children's Hospital for maybe 14 to 16 hours with a client, trying to help them with the process, because sometimes caregivers or sponsors just don't know the process or they're too timid, especially when it comes to law enforcement. So that's kind of the crisis situations that I tend to see as a social worker when providing social services to victims of crime, and specifically our minors or children.
I want to push just a bit on this, Sarah, before we move on, because I know I've learned a lot from you about crisis. What happens when we as the attorney feel it's a crisis, or the child feels it's a crisis, but maybe objectively, how do you gauge that?
I was thinking about this as I heard each person's different perspective, and I still come back to, is it life-threatening? Is it destabilizing? Is it dysregulating? And what are the long-term consequences? Because I think about my own daughter and what her actions are going to be a consequence because of her immigration status are going to look very different than colleagues and friends who have a fully documented kiddo. And so how I'm thinking about each decision a minor or an adult client, but a kiddo is making, that might be semi-dangerous, that might be, I see some of my immigrant unaccompanied kiddos engaging in drug use as something to regulate that is much more crisis level because of the immigration consequences, because of how it can show up in their case. And so there are things that my threshold looks a little bit different, but even then it's coming back to what are the capacity of the choices they're making and what repercussions it can have for them in the immediate future. Is it going to keep them, are they going to stay alive? My goal is keeping everybody alive for today, for tomorrow. And then what, if they're doing something that is just to stabilize, to regulate for these moments, what consequences can it have? Is it the only way they can get through those moments? Is it, I mean, running away is sometimes we need to step out of the house, but is it truly running away? Or is it self-harming, that self-harming with suicidal ideation, with a plan for suicide, or is it a release? And so
I think we might have some.
assessment with a background relationship. So having a good sense, and then being able to also turn and to the clinician, to the attorney, to the legal assistant, to express, look, this is what I gathered. This is what I found, without breaking confidentiality, but being able to educate other team members who they're also reaching out to. So finding this balance of, no, this isn't ideal. I don't like that they're smoking. I don't like that they've left the home. I don't love, this is how it's playing out. But because part of a lot of crisis management to me is open communication. And so if a kid's telling me what's going on, then I would far rather have the line of communication. And I'm a harm reductionist at my core. So like I said, it's not my first choice of things that are happening, but let's see how, now that I know, what we can do next. Because we can, if I know, I can help move forward. But it's being able to report back to a understanding team that I also trust, that isn't going to freak out, isn't going to absolutely panic and shame client in the process, because that reaction of whatever the action may be is really going to lead to the next steps and how kiddo respond and is willing to connect in the future.
Thank you, Sarah. Let's get into some tools so we can hear how these can be used, because I know these situations can feel overwhelming. So question to the panel, what child-centered techniques do you all use when a client is in crisis? Deanna, do you want to start us off?
Absolutely. I think this is where it's incredibly more critical to incorporate the principles of trauma-informed care, reflecting back, of course, on the awesome recommendations of Amanda and America discussed today, and Acacia, the panel yesterday. In practice, I think that clients in crisis, what has helped me is being hypervigilant to their nonverbal cues, their body language, their tone, my tone, and kind of reading between the lines of what they're saying and what they're not saying. In some situations, it's not just me repeating back what they said to me, but also making sure that they're repeating back to me what I've told them. And that's because in my experience, clients in a crisis have a shorter bandwidth to digest, understand, and remember critical information. And even though I'm working up their immigration case, and that's critical for stability, that might not be what's in their mind is the most immediate important need in their life. So they might not be necessarily focusing, or they have a hindrance in their ability to focus on what I'm saying or the guidance I'm trying to give them. So making sure that I can hear them in their own words, repeat back what I'm telling them, I think can be very critical in those situations. So that mutual repeat back. In some situations, because everyone receives information differently, and some of our information that we give them can be so dense, a visual can be really effective in these kinds of situations. And kind of helping visualize where they're at in the process, or what does this process look like. The visual here I really like. I think it's a great reminder of how we kind of have to go into the client's world, assess their safety, evaluate their need, and then try and pull support. Because yes, I'm the legal go-to, but I'm also a place where they can go to get support, and I can refer them out. I think in a couple of my cases, it has come down to a constant exercise of showing understanding of their emotional state and their current social need. Their social need. I think it's key in the empathetic engagement of the representation. So for one of my clients, and it's kind of looked like patience with no-shows, delay in client responses, temporary losing all contact with my client. So I don't know where they are. They've left the house. Their number doesn't work. And it's been a couple of weeks. And so kind of showing patience and understanding that this crisis is impacting and inhibiting the representation, not necessarily the client. In another case, it's really looked like meeting with the client remotely, and that's because they don't have a safe, responsible adult to have them come to the office. And in a completely different situation, it's been the opposite that's true in their home. One of my clients that I'm thinking about right now is in a current labor trafficking situation, and they're in that home and they won't leave that home. And so that means that in order to have confidential, safe meeting space, they have to come to the office for those consultations. I think aside from being patient and those flexibilities, sometimes it's been piecemeal, well, I call it piecemeal representation. I think with a lot of my other clients, they have the bandwidth, they can take on more responsibility, they can engage more with their cases. But for my clients in crises, at least in my experience, it seems like they can only handle one thing at a time. So in one situation, one of my clients, I am having the hardest time getting them just to give me passport photos for their employment authorization document. And so usually I'd be like trying to make one attorney-client meeting as proficient as possible, because that way they don't have to come to the office so much. They don't have to call with me as much, right? Because the time they're meeting with me, they're not in school, they're not with friends, they're not working, and I'm trying to give them as much as their time as they need. But with these clients in crises, having everything compounded can be so overwhelming. So in some situations, it's like, let's only meet to discuss this one thing. Okay, and now I just need you to come and drop off those passport photos in my office the one time, instead of doing, okay, you're gonna come to the office, you're gonna bring your passport photos, we're gonna do an affidavit session, we're gonna fill out some forms. That can be overwhelming, and I've seen that fail with some of my clients in crises. Another strategy, especially with mental health issues or instances when the client is not disclosing what's really going on for their wellness crises or their mental health crises, it's been the timing of questions. So when I can, I try and give the client their space to let them tell me when they're ready to. And it can be me acknowledging that void, right? If I'm reading their body language and I can tell that they're keeping something from me, I can go ahead and tell them, I can tell there's something going on and you're not ready to tell me. I'm here to listen when you're ready to share. In other situations, because let's say I have a waiver of confidentiality and I'm working with Sarah on a case and the client discloses something to her and she can then tell me, because she also has that waiver of confidentiality, I can go to the client and go, I know that XYZ is happening, and I'm here to listen when you're ready to talk. Of course, that's assuming it doesn't affect the immigration case or any other kind of criminal or child protective issue. But if you do have that situation where you know something is happening, that the client doesn't want to talk to you about, I think you can go ahead and say, I know XYZ. I would love to learn more about what's happening. It's okay if you're not ready to share right now, but I have to tell you how this affects your immigration case, or I have to tell you ABC. So I think those are definitely some practical ways to incorporate child-centered approaches. My favorite, honestly, is developing a service plan that identifies a circle of care.
All right, so let's break that down a bit. Susie, do you want to take us through what a circle of care is? Can you explain how you use the circle of care when you're working with clients?
Yes, absolutely. So I think the circle of care really just boils down to making the child the center of all decision making, empowering them to navigate these complex systems with confidence. And like Diana said, visuals are important, and having them see that they have us as advocates, but that they also have other people outside of their immigration case that are here to support them. So what that looks like for me is, for example, if we're working with a client that is under Child Protective Services custody and who is receiving victim services from law enforcement, and also let's say that they have a social worker from school that they really trust, I think it's defining the roles of all of these stakeholders and also defining the role of myself and the attorney, making sure that they see that we're all here for them, but also to allow them to have those, to make those decisions to, let's say that let's say that there is like a waiver of confidentiality for both us and Sarah, and that they would like for us to communicate with Sarah about what is happening. Having the circle of care helps the client understand all of our roles, because it can get really confusing. Just navigating the immigration system is hard for them. And I mean, let's be honest, it's hard for most of us to really understand like what is going on in immigration these days. So defining all of our roles is key. But I think it also helps clients understand their role and the power that they do have. Something that we always remind our clients is that they are our bosses. Tú eres mi jefe. If something doesn't, if something happens that you don't want to happen or you don't want someone to know, there is that confidentiality, there is that waiver, and that is always going to be like the center of this collaboration. It has to work for the client, and it has to be up to the client whether we can all collaborate. So I think that that is really the idea of the circle of care, and then the service plan is a more detailed plan that puts all of the roles of CPS, law enforcement, social worker, paralegal, attorney. It is really just like a comprehensive overview of what we can all do to support them.
Tatiana, how would you describe the child advocate role? Where does it fit in? And what is the role of the child advocate when there are all of these different players in the system?
Yeah, so for us, when I guess I would definitely include us in the service plan if the child has a child advocate. Unfortunately, not every child in custody has a child advocate. But I would probably even put us under primary support. Our meetings with the children are completely confidential, and we always like to point that out because unfortunately, their clinicians, right, their meetings with their clinicians while in custody aren't 100% confidential, right, because everything is documented and everything will end up in their ORR file, which could impact their legal case down the road. Maybe, that doesn't happen often, but we always like to point that out. And so the other big thing is we use that confidentiality. I know we're going to talk about that in a second, but it really helps us build that rapport with the child where we say to them, we won't share anything without your permission. And we're kind of like that middle ground where sometimes a child might not feel comfortable asking for something with, the program staff or even their attorney. So we can kind of, say, hey, I can reach out to your attorney and say, you have a question about your case, or we can be present during sometimes very difficult conversations about, VD or long-term foster care, whatever it is. We through ORR, the TVPRA, we actually have access to their entire ORR file and have access to all staffings and meetings related to the child. So we can be present during some of the meetings that they might even be having with the consulate or with FFS. And that really helps, I think, a child, when they have the really good rapport with us, it will allow them to see a familiar face. We also attend immigration court with them. Obviously, they have their, attorney that will handle the legal case, but again, we're that friendly face for them, because we see them weekly. We get to build that rapport, and we always, I know you all as attorneys probably do this as well, but we always enjoy bringing some fidget toys to court. And so I would say, because we have so much direct access to the child, I think we would fit in under that primary support. The other thing is we also can continue working with the child post-release. It is limited, but unlike their, clinician or case manager, where they often build good rapport, sometimes, they have to say goodbye. But we can be that one face that stays with them and say, I'll call you once you're with your dad and we'll check in. So I think there's a lot of value in having a child advocate for the kiddos.
Thank you, Tatiana. Sarah?
I just wanted to add really quickly, first of all, to any clinicians and social workers who are having a heart attack, thinking about the therapist talking to the to the attorneys, even with a waiver. Whether it's a waiver ROI, what I've seen has been wildly helpful is the attorney or myself saying, is it okay if I share this with someone? Is it okay if I share this? And every time the client said, of course, yes, but it continues, it shows that you are my, you're my boss in action. And please also know that when we're communicating, it's very,
Sorry, Sarah.
can you hear me?
Yes, Sarah,
Good.
so sorry to interrupt.
Yeah,
We need
yes.
to announce the CLE code real quick. I
Of course.
apologize. That is HELP, HELP. That's the CLE code. Thank you so much, everyone.
The other thing that I've seen be really, really helpful is when we sat together, when Diana was able to say, hey, let's have a call all together. And so the client could see how we worked together and that it wasn't ever gossipy. It wasn't sitting down, saying anything behind anyone's back, but the chance to be able to show up at the table, whether it was virtual or face-to-face, created a very united front and presented we really truly are all here while we have different roles. I want my social worker colleagues to not think it's just completely against everything that we learn in social work, but really for the right. And we're not repeating a whole hour-long session, but it's communicating the important life-threatening, sustaining thing.
Thank you, Sarah. And that leads us right into our next topic of confidentiality. So I think that you got us ahead, Sarah, by sharing from the social work side, the perspective of confidentiality. Deanna, from the legal side, from the attorney perspective, what is our duty, our ethical duty of confidentiality?
I mean, that's exactly it. It is an ethical duty and definitely affects our licensing. And it's in effect at all times. Attorneys cannot affirmatively disclose information about a client's representation. Sometimes the sole fact that someone is your client is confidential. And when I'm referring to representation, I mean, it refers to information the client shares with you in confidence. And that's to the attorney, but it also can incorporate the legal team. So once you incorporate maybe a social worker or mental health expert into the legal team and you're making it in the direction of the legal case, that is when you might start walking some fine lines as when does confidentiality trigger, when is it not triggered. The information is really considered privileged, but the information can be disclosed if there's informed consent. And what does informed consent look like, right? So if you just get a blanket waiver to talk freely at any time about anything, that might be a little bit too broad and you might have to be more specific. In practice, I kind of follow Sarah's rule where, yes, I have this waiver or this release, but anytime that there's something going on in the conversation or in the representation, I always bring it back up to the client. Are you comfortable if I share this specific fact or this specific thing with Sarah or one of the other amazing panelists that we have on here, right? Whether it's the child advocate or the social worker, and making sure that the client knows when, especially if they're in crisis, when I'm going to share that information, what exactly I'm going to say to that person, and why I'm going to share that information with that individual, I think is critical, especially with a client that's in crises. And of course, there's also the other legal component of when you can disclose, and that's of course to prevent certain death or bodily harm, and to prevent the client from committing a crime or fraud that is reasonably certain to result in injury to the financial interest. Here in Texas, it's a little bit different. Before I moved to Texas, I was not a mandatory reporter. But now that I work in Texas and I'm licensed in Texas, I am a mandatory reporter, which is a little bit different than what it looks like in other states.
Thank you, Deanna. And I did want to just make sure everybody saw the message from Sila. We have included the materials that are referenced in the prior slide, the circle of care and the service plan in Sila's materials. We briefly addressed the service plan, but I do want to ask the panel, for those of you who have used this amazing service plan that Deanna's put together, how have you found that it facilitates communication with the team and really with the client?
I can speak to that. So a lot of the times we would, based on the program, we will also have our own service plans with our clients on a monthly basis. And this really just helped the case move forward, because ultimately, yes, we're here to provide social services to the client. However, our overall goal was to stabilize the client sufficiently where they will become self-empowered, self-sufficient, and we will be able to close the case, right? And so that's what we use to be able to get to that point. And so a lot of the times, like I forgot it was Deanna or Sarah, but or Susie, I think it was, a lot of the times it required for all these factors, these elements to take place. So I'd be like, okay, don't forget you have your appointment with your attorney. Like, I got you. You need to take like those passport pictures. And so I've had attorneys reach out to me like, hey, like X, Y, and Z client, I'm asking them to bring this to me, right? I've noticed it's been quite a minute. This is kind of withholding holding up the EAD process, right? So then a lot of the times I would just put it in the service plan, like caseworker Yanita will pick you up, we will go do those passport pictures, and then depending on their circumstances, either I would mail them to them or I would drop them off, right? And so these types of service plans really help not just move the social services aspect, but I think all other elements, like making sure you make your appointment on time for with your therapist, or making sure you're calling your attorney. And so it is helpful, and it also holds the clients accountable, because something that I've noticed is that a lot of our newcomers are kind of used to doing things in their own time frame, and so it doesn't work like that here in the United States. You know that if you arrive to your fingerprint appointment 10 minutes later, something that just means you just lost your spot, or you can't do that for a medical appointment, right? So these service plans have helped us maintain the client accountable, but also the social worker or the caseworker accountable.
Thank you, Yanira. We're going to switch gears here a bit and move into what we fondly call our Dear Abby session of hypotheticals. So are you ready, panel? Yeah, you ready for this? Okay. Dear panel, our team represents a 15-year-old youth from Honduras in her SIJ case, Julissa. Julissa told the paralegal on our team that she has a new boyfriend and he's 19. What should we do? Susie, you want to kick us off?
Yes. So I think the first part of this is assessing if it is an emergency and if it is a crisis. Like Sarah mentioned, this is not necessarily life-threatening, but we can definitely see this become a crisis in the future, especially if she does disclose more information and if she does feel more comfortable. And then that is if I will ask if it's okay for her to give me more information about this person. But this is all while sort of being self-aware of my tone, my body language, and the environment that I have established. Showing general curiosity is key, but not being patronizing and understanding just my privilege in the conversation as well. So acknowledging that and asking if she's comfortable sharing more about this boyfriend, asking her what are the dynamics of your relationship and if she's open to talking about it. And I think that's whenever you learn how to read between the lines. If she does share, well, we only see each other like once a week at night. He picks me up and he takes me to like an abandoned place. And I think that's obviously a red flag. But not panicking in the moment. And of course, if the child does open up about the relationship, and let's say they show some interest in learning more about birth control or sex education, that is when I will ask for permission and also just ask permission to elevate this up. Let's say I'm working with Diana. This is a case that I have with Diana. And let's say we have an amazing social worker in the community, Sarah and Yanira. I know they're very capable in having these conversations and these charlas with this child. And that is when I would get a waiver of confidentiality and ask if the child feels comfortable in referring this out to Yanira or Sarah. And yeah, that is also when we pull in the service plan to prevent a crisis from happening. That I think that would be my first approach.
Thanks, Susie. Deanna, once Susie pulled you in on a case, what would you as the attorney do once you were looped in?
Yeah, a lot of things comes to mind because not a crisis, but lots of potential for crises here, whether it's date abuse, rape, potential pregnancy, statutory crime, U visa issues, where is this relationship going, a possible SIJS issue. We've definitely seen situations where older partners take advantage of the younger partner because of their age and development that could lead to a trafficking situation. So I think calling the client, having them come in, having a conversation with them to assess their safety, talking to them about their immigration case, re-explain my role, re-explain confidentiality, and explain, hey, I just want to talk to you about this relationship as it might affect your immigration case, kind of putting it in that context. And then making sure if there's any ethical consideration triggers, like I said, in Texas, I am a mandatory reporter. And then from there, kind of let them know their rights, right? So even if they haven't disclosed abuse or a sexual relationship or rape, it's critical to let them know of their rights, their right to be respected, their right to say no to have sex, their right to family planning, to feel respected, and kind of letting them know if they want to talk more about that or they want to learn more. Maybe they don't want to talk to me about it. I can then offer up our great panelists here and go, hey, if you want, and if you give me permission, I'm happy to give you their information or talk to them and have them connect with you if you want to learn more a little bit about that. So ideally, I could convince them to let me refer them out to social services or mental health support on the situation if they're interested in talking more about that. But let's assume like at this time, they haven't disclosed anything of crises, then there's nothing more to really do besides hopefully get that permission to make that social referral.
Thank you, Deanna. Tatiana, in the context of the clients you work with when they are detained, what would you do if this were a detained child?
So in this case, we would start off by thanking her for making this disclosure to us. And again, centering the child and being child-led, asking what she would like us to do, right? And that can mean she might just wanted us to know and just to listen, and that is okay. Especially knowing that, you know, she probably hasn't had contact with him. She might just want to, you know, share with someone that she left behind a boyfriend or her boyfriend's in the United States. You know, we really don't know. But depending on what she would like, what kind of support she would like, that would determine the path we take. If she's interested in communicating with him, we would have to unfortunately be upfront in letting her know that it'll likely be very difficult to get phone calls with him since he's not family, he's not a relative. But I always, you know, say I can always ask, right? I cannot guarantee anything, but if this is someone that is special to you and it's, you know, your significant other, I recognize that that is someone that is important to you, and I will ask. And that might lead to additional questions, you know, so that I can advocate with ORR and with staff and trying to explain the significance of this person. For example, if her mental health is deteriorating, this might be someone that she looks at as her support system, and she might actually really benefit in connecting with them. And we have seen situations where that can happen. Sometimes they might be supervised calls at first, so it's not impossible, but it's definitely not an easy ask. You know, unfortunately, there are policies on who they can connect with while detained. And the other thing that we also, you know, might do is if they want to, you know, if talking to them isn't going to be a possibility, then we might you know, just let them, you know, again, just sit with them and respecting that it's a difficult situation that she's in. And, you know, if other disclosures come up, then we'll navigate that. But that's about it.
All right, so we're going to have our next question here. Dear panel, we met with Julissa and she told us she got into a fight with her boyfriend and he called her a bleep and slapped her in the face. She also shared she is now pregnant. We also noticed marks on her leg. She told us she's cutting. How do we talk to her about partner violence and what can we do to help her? Sarah, you're the person I would call in the moment, so you're the person I'm calling on here. Can you
I
talk us
can
through
imagine
the
that.
complicated dynamic? Yeah.
So, first and foremost, in Texas, as a mandated reporter, I'm going to see if there's any way anybody else has already reported this that I can document, because I would have already told my client in the beginning that the reasons I would have to make a report, but that's not going to feel like it when she's disclosing her boyfriend. And so I'm going to ease into that as gently as possible. I want to know everything she's willing to share about her relationship. So I have some sense of whether it's what other family supports. This is where that service plan is so helpful, because I've already gotten a sense of my team's likely already brought me in earlier, so I know something about kiddo. They've given me some good family background, and I know what other players are, what other helpers are out there. I want to know how she's talking about him. And hopefully we would have already had rapport. So I would have some background, but I'm talking CPS report because of the age in the relationship and now the pregnancy. I file the minimum number of reports, the least I possibly can, to be ethical and safe. And so if I know she's already been to a hospital for a pregnancy exam or a clinic and they've made a report, I want to see if I can cross-reference that, because I want to maintain I'm here for you, but not a snitch, as she might see, depending how she's talking about the relationship. I also want to know about the cut. I want to know about, is it because she's releasing this pent up, frustrated hurt and she doesn't know what to do, or is it because she says, that's it, I'm done, I can't handle it? Either way, we're going to build on the service plan of the circles of support, or both the circle of support and the service plan, employing the people that are involved so that she has lots of people to check in with. And again, asking permission, who can be in her safety plan ultimately is what I'm going to be drafting with her, and not a super rigid, call 911 at all times safety plan, but who else can you reach out to in a big moment? Who can you call on? Who can be your support? How often should we be checking in? How fresh are cuts? And I mean, it's ugly, but I want to know like where you're cutting, how you're cutting, what you're using, to be assessing the urgency, and is it something you're doing every single day? Are there substances involved? And what other, again, clinic and partners are involved? Because likely reports are going to be made, especially as she continues prenatal care, regardless of where she goes next or what the next steps along a pregnancy are. And so these are going to be re-triggering, coming up over and over things. And I want to continue to make sure we have a good line of communication. Sometimes that's moving slow and steady, and sometimes social workers out there, I learn that sometimes there's not enough information to report that day, or I have, your maximum number of days that you can gather some more information. And so sometimes I use that to my advantage, but I want to make sure that I'm knowing the case background to de-escalate as much as possible, because things will continue to escalate. And I want to be seen as a team member, not as an antagonist, somebody making the situation worse. So anything I can do to reassure and still be a safe person when I might not be giving answers she wants to hear. That was a lot.
Okay, here we go. Dear panel, Julisa's stepdad called her a whore and kicked her out. She's sleeping on her friend's couch. When we were finally able to meet with her, she told us her stepdad has been touching her when her mom worked the night shift. She has younger sisters in the house who aren't our clients. What should we do? Yanira, I'd love to hear the social work perspective on this one first.
It's actually happened before in a very similar situation. And so tagging to what Sarah was saying in the previous scenario, right? And so I think that's why it's so crucial and important for people to work, the community to work as a partnership, because Sarah, for example, want to help in the mental health aspect, but here as a social worker, let's just start addressing the actual problems, like outside of the mental health aspect, right? So similar to like Julia's scenario, the first thing I would do, definitely a CPS report, always. And then secondly, I would ask if the client is okay with doing a police report. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're hesitant. A lot of the times they want to be loyal to their family, even though the family are the ones harming them. That's something that I remember struggling a lot with, but that I had to learn how to respect and be okay with. And so other times they will come back around and say, you know what, I think I'm ready to move forward with that police report. So that will definitely be kind of the first questions that I would do as well. And so after completing that, and for me, this can definitely be elevated, or is almost a crisis situation. I would go and meet with the minor, right, with the child, and see where they are. And so a lot of the times, a social worker or a caseworker turns out to be the liaison between the client and their parents, or the client and the caregivers or sponsors. So a lot of times it's, all right, how can we all work together to resolve this issue? So a lot of the times, or maybe there might be times where the client had to be removed from the home, or it was best, and the mom or dad would be like, you know what, yeah, let him stay away for this moment. And so obtaining that consent, again, is so crucial and important, like I've said before, that helps us navigate how to go throughout with this, right? I would say this out of experience, sometimes when one does a CPS report, it does not require, I mean, it would be helpful if one can do a police report as well, but sometimes depending on the information that you actually put on the report, CPS automatically sends it to law enforcement. So that's something that I've explained to clients, and they, to understand that, hey, it wasn't me, it wasn't because you didn't give me permission. Is that something that our government system just, that's how it works. So And so yeah, and then just trying to stabilize and do a safety plans, similar to what Sarah was saying, doing safety plans, and maybe seeing how we can meet halfway with the mom, right? Or how can we make this better? Because sometimes parents would react right away, and you know what, my child comes first. But you also have to understand that some parents are not going to accept it, and they will deny it. And so that's another issue that you have to learn how to navigate. But ultimately, my goal is the minors' safety, and that's really what guides me throughout the whole situation.
Thank you, Yanira. Deanna, I don't know about you, but in law school, they did not teach me how to deal with these situations. We're hearing about mandatory reporting, we've got these ethical situations. We've got a client who's homeless, and CPS, you know, is now going to be involved. As the attorney in this role, what do we do?
Great question. And I think I got very similar law school training in which this was completely absent from real world practice. Immigration attorney, right? Protect, document, get evidence. But I think at this moment in time, I am a guide and I am a weaver. Kind of pulling in that terminology from yesterday. And I think that the immigration case kind of has to take a pause to ensure safety and stability of the client first. So what I mean by weaver in this situation is talking to my clients, again, assessing that safety and immediate needs and getting that permission to pull everyone else in. Let's all have a conversation. Let's all look at this service plan and go, okay, CPS, who are you? Explain your role and what do you need? 1, 2, 3. Okay, this is where we are with the process. Law enforcement is involved. Okay, who's the point of contact? Who's the victim's advocate? Who is the detective? Let's put that in one place. Okay, and what are your next steps and what do you need from the client, and put it right then and there. Then go to Sarah and Yanira. Okay, mental health. What do we think we need right now? Is that something does she want counseling, right? Or is she still not there yet? Where are we on that? Or is this a situation where she needs psychiatric care and needs to be put in a hospital? We definitely had clients that had to go into psychiatric care because of suicidal ideations or attempts. So kind of having that conversation with them and go, okay, for that psychiatric care, step 1, step 2, step 3, and having all of these actors come together in one place and have those conversations with the client so that she understands everyone's role and the step of each process. So I think that's been really, really critical. And we've definitely been successful in incorporating that. In the meantime, kind of asserting myself as a point of contact and saying, I am the immigration attorney. I am representing her in this capacity. So as things go along, I can start accumulating that evidence. And also, if there's already immigration relief pending, kind of protecting, like, you know, advising her, hey, you're about to have this conversation with law enforcement. Let's revisit, you know, what their role is, what my role is, and how this, you know, because if she's self-medicating, you know, she doesn't have to disclose everything to this law enforcement official. And so kind of walking through and guiding her in that situation. So kind of putting my advocate hat on hold and putting on my weaver and guide hat, I think in that moment would be critical.
Thank you, Deanna. To wrap up, I want to briefly talk about setting healthy boundaries in times of crisis. Susie, I'm going to give you the last word here. Can you help us understand how you create healthy boundaries when you're working with clients in crisis?
Yeah, I think I've reached out to most people on this panel for help. Looking at you, Sarah, Deanna, Lauren, Yanira, help. Like they keep calling me. It's like the weekend. But yeah, really clearly defining my role as a paralegal is just important. It establishes those limitations that I have to provide emotional support and counseling, because I'm certainly not an expert in that. This doesn't mean shutting off our clients when they are asking for help. If they are calling me because they are in a time of distress, like I'm not gonna say like, oh, I'm a paralegal, I can't help you. I'm definitely gonna take a note of it, and I'm gonna look for resources, and it means redirecting them to another professional, of course, with their consent. I also, by defining my role, I think I'm also sort of showing them everything that I'm not, which can get really confusing for them, as they tend to think that I am this like all-encompassing safe person that can answer all of my questions and who they can turn to 24/7, which, you know, is extremely draining. And I don't think that we should be put in that position all of the time. And of course, our boundaries can always shift depending on the situation. But I do think establishing what our limitations are, what our role is, does create those healthy boundaries, and sort of makes this work a little bit more sustainable.
Thank you, Susie. I believe we're at time, but thank you all for sharing your expertise. And I know I feel lucky to be able to have you on my speed dial list. So I would encourage those listening to make sure that you have a network of people in different professions who come to this work from different lenses and can provide you a sounding board and can be a resource to your clients when they need it.